Greetings, survivors and friends, SHADOWFRAX here, and what is the one thing we all want in Rust? Apart from pies, of course. The one thing which the whole game has literally been unplayable without for all these years. Yes, that's right. Clocks! Or timers. But seriously, with electricity soon to become a part of the main game, and it already being on the staging branch to fiddle around with, I have indeed been fiddling around with it, and today I've decided to give you a tutorial on how to make your very own clock or timer in Rust. I might even show you some other things too. At the very least, you should learn something. Now, I have seen a number of different designs for clocks already, and I'm impressed by how many different takes on the concept there have been so far. But having fiddled around with the idea a lot myself, I think you'll find this is about the cleanest, sexiest, and most efficient way of going about the job. At least, I think so anyway. If any one of you bright sparks comes up with anything more efficient though, I'd love to know. So, where does one start? Well, we'll need a power source of course, and I'm going to be using a small generator for this. They only have one output now, so we'll have to split the power up as we go along. I'm also going to fit a switch as the first component, just in case we want to turn the whole thing off and save on those electricity bills. Next in the line, we're going to place a splitter because I'm anticipating 3 sections of this contraption that will need their own power supply. Then another splitter which will serve the first part of our clock, and that is its heart. We're going to need something that beats at exactly 1 Hertz, or once a second, and sends out a pulse of power when it does so. So I'm going to show you what I think is the simplest way of accomplishing this with Rust's electrical bits and bobs. We're going to need 3 components, a timer, a blocker, and a branch, and this is how you wire them up. Take a power out from the splitter and connect it to the power in of the timer. Also, before we go any further, we need to set the timer to 1 second. This is important. Next, take another power out from the splitter and plug it into the blocker. We then take the power out of the blocker and plug that into the branch. Now take the branch outlet of the branch and plug that into the toggle of the timer. And finally, take the power out from the timer and plug it into the block pass-through of the blocker. Now, I understand that might all sound really complex, but I'll explain exactly what's going on in a second. First of all though, I'm just going to attach a temporary light and connect that up so you can see visually what happens when we turn it all on. Bingo! As you can see, we've successfully created a feedback loop which is sending out a pulse of energy exactly once a second. So, how's it doing that? Well, the power first has to pass through this blocker, and that will only let it through if no power is being supplied to its other input. That's where the timer comes in. Every time the timer is triggered by the branch, it blocks the power. As soon as it's finished though, power is free to flow again, and the timer gets re-triggered by the branch. The whole thing will keep going indefinitely until you either switch it off, or the generator runs out of juice. Whichever happens soonest. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, then you might need to fiddle around with it yourself until something clicks. Now, I'm going to turn all of that off and remove the light because we need to build the next part of the clock, which is the digital display. Not much good without that. And for this, we'll need another splitter, 3 counters, 1 each for hours, minutes, and seconds, and 2 more branches. So this is how to wire up the actual readout. First, connect up the splitter, then take a feed out of it to each of the 3 displays. Then we take the power out of our timer circuit and connect that to the increment of the counter on the right, which will be counting our seconds. Next, we need to connect the counters to each other so they can communicate and work as a team. Bear with me on this one, please. So we take the pass-through of the seconds counter and connect that to the input of the branch above it. Then take the branch outlet of that and feed it back to the counter's clear. Finally, we take the power outlet of the branch and plug that into the minute counter's increment input. We then just have to do the exact same thing for the minute counter. Lastly, and this is very important, we have to set the pass-through values for each counter. For the seconds one, it should be 60 of course, and the same for the minutes one too. You can leave the hours one as it is, unless of course you want to start actually counting days, in which case you might have too much time on your hands. Now, because we don't have that much time on our hands in this video, and for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to reduce the pass-through figures to 3 for the seconds and minutes, as I think this will help you see what's going on much more easily. Right, let's switch it all on and see what happens. As you can see, the timer circuit is triggering the seconds counter to increment by 1 every time it sends out a pulse, which is of course once a second. Then, when the seconds counter reaches its pass-through value, which is only 3 at the moment, it sends out its own pulse, which both resets itself and increments the next counter by 1. The same process repeats with the minutes counter, and voila, we can have a digital clock or timer. Now, this is all very well and good, but what if we want to be able to reset it? Just cutting the power isn't enough, as the counters will still remember where they got to. Well, this is where we'll have to expand our circuitry further, and I'll also show you a practical application for all of this that might actually be useful in-game for some. Now, you may wonder why we put these branches all the way up here. Well, that's because now we're going to insert a couple of OR switches into the gaps. OR switches let you have 2 inputs, and if either one is active, then the switch will do its job of letting power through. That's just what we want here, because we want to be able to control the clear functions on these counters manually with another input. I don't have to worry about the hour counter, of course, because I can do that one directly. I'll also need another splitter and a timer in order to make this work. So, to reset everything manually with a switch, here's how we have to wire it up. First, we disconnect the clear terminals and route them through the OR switches instead. It'll just work as normal like this, but now we can take another power supply to the timer, setting it to 1 second again, then take the power out from that to the new splitter, and finally take a feed from that to each of the OR switches, and one directly to the clear of the hour counter. What you'll see now is that at any time we can reset the whole thing to 0 and it will start again. But that's not all! This sort of thing is great as an intellectual exercise, of course, but I realise you're not likely to do all this farting around in the actual game unless there's a decent reason. It's not as if electricity is going to be essential to playing Rust, and it isn't going to make you shoot straighter, but here's one of many possible applications of a system like this that I've thought of. All we need is one more splitter, another timer, a counter, a branch, and a laser detector, although you could replace that with a different trigger, such as a pressure pad or something else we might end up getting in the future. So, if I give power to the detector, counter, and timer, again setting this to 1 second, take the power out from the detector to the branch, and then branch out of that to the increment of the counter, and to our reset timer, and lastly connect the power out of our new timer to the clear of our new counter, we've managed to create something really useful. Let me show you. Every time I trigger the laser, the new counter goes up by 1 and our timer resets. So I could leave this running, go offline, and when I come back later, assuming I still have a base, it'll tell me not only how many visitors have triggered my detector, but how long since the last one. You could even add a light to indicate whether someone was actually still triggering it. Good perhaps if you're nervous about door campers. Thanks to the last timer, I can reset the counter as well. Now I hope that even if this is something you're not likely to make, you have at least learned a bit more about the possibilities for all of this stuff in Rust and might use it as a springboard for your own ideas. I'm sure with a bit more effort I could condense this down even more and make it look a lot tidier, and if you come up with anything more efficient or some other ways of using timers, then please let me know on my Discord or one of the other places I hang out, such as Twitter, Facebook, or my Steam group. Please adjust the like and subscribe buttons to positive if you found this useful, and activate the notification bell because it works at least 40% of the time these days, and I shall catch you all in the next video, but until then, keep calm and stay rusty. Cheerio.